Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
Dianne Wolfer is an award-winning author of 25 books, including the acclaimed Light series, The Dog with Seven Names, and The Last Light Horse. Dianne's book, Scout and the Rescue Dogs, won the Children's Book of the Year at the Western Australian Premier's Literary Awards. Erica Wagner is a painter, collage artist, book publisher, and creative consultant to storytellers. Erica's first book, Hope is the Thing, written by Joanna Bell, won the 2024 Children's Book Council of Australia's New Illustrator Award, as well as the Wilderness Society Environment Award for Children's Literature for Picture Fiction. Today I'm talking to author Dianne Wolfer and illustrator Erica Wagner about their new book for young readers, The Colt From Old Re. Dianne and Erica, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Greg.
There was movement at the station, for the word had passed around. The colt from old regret had got away. It's such a pleasure to read those lines, and indeed the whole ballad. They carry such a rhythm, along with a great sense of anticipation for what is to come. Dianne, what is it about The Man from Snowy River that inspired you to recast this iconic work of bush poetry?
I grew up in a family where my mother particularly loved bush poetry. And so when my sister and I were younger, she would often recite, she loved Clancy of the Overflow best, but I particularly loved that rhythm and the excitement of The Man from Snowy River. And my sister now lives up in the high country, and when I visit, those words come back to me. And so I've had the bush, that particular poem has been part of me and my imagination for many years since I was little. And then I guess at some point thinking of the words about the stock horse snuffs the battle with delight. Later in the poem, then the pony's sides are blood from hip to shoulder from the spur. And so I thought, well, if they love the chase, and do we really need the spurs that much? And so I'd like to think about that from the horse's point of view and approach it from a different angle. And so the idea was in my imagination for a very, very long time. And then it took many years to make, as it does with a picture book. People think picture books are easy, but they're really the hardest genre of all, I think.
And Erica, what does The Man from Snowy River mean to you?
Well, I obviously know those opening words really well. For me, it brings that whole life of the high country into sort of vivid colour. For me now, I also think about the history of Australia. I had to really think about this fact that it was a colonial story, that it was celebrating this masculine myth of the man from Snowy River, and then bring that together with what I have learned as an adult and also in my publishing life of working with a lot of First Nations authors and illustrators, telling their stories and knowing about our history. So I wanted to think about it in that broad context. I also wanted to think about it as that love for country. I read a lot about Banjo Paterson before I illustrated the book as well. I read the book The Brumbies Wars, which is also very interesting because I love the wild snowy mountains, but I'm also very conscious that there's a lot of discussion and difficulty around feral animals in the national parks. And then I thought it is part of our story. It's part of our Australian national story. And I feel like it has a place there alongside all the other issues about our history and our country. And that's what I felt the fact that Dianne had then riffed on it made me feel, let's tell it, knowing what we now know more about.
Dianne, in your retelling of the story, it's the colt that becomes the main character, an animal character rather than a human, and of course, a different point of view.
Yes, writing from the colt's point of view gave me an opportunity to explore things via different senses. As humans, we're so sight-oriented, whereas from an animal's point of view, I could bring in different senses, and I wanted to bring in smells, and there's the hooves clattering, and there's the bits and the bridles clanking, and there's the smell of tobacco wafting up, and water that tastes of snow, and the rosellas. So those are things, I guess, as humans we can also enjoy, but if you're an animal, you're experiencing that differently. So it just gave me a different viewpoint, a different way into the story, to just consider it from a different perspective.
Now, here's an interesting word: anthropomorphism. Dianne, you've completed some research into that subject. Tell me about that research and how it's found its way into your books for children.
Yes, anthropomorphism is a word that was with me for 5 years when I went back and did research on crafting animal characters in Australian literature. And anthropomorphism, of course, means giving human qualities to animals, which gives you a different way to explore a story. So a classic example, I guess, is Peter Rabbit. If they're wearing jackets or talking like humans, it's anthropomorphism. So I went back and looked at how anthropomorphism has been used in Australian literature. And there's a lot of interesting ways. Of course, they're windows to difficult, challenging situations. And around the commemoration of 100 years since Anzac, a lot of books came out for children that were from an animal perspective. So the story was either horse or dog, and that, I think, gives children a safe window, a safe character to explore a very challenging, dreadful topic. The other thing that really interested in me was looking at whether we know that in the Western canon of literature, we've got if I say the lion, of course it's regal, and the dog's faithful, and the fox is a trickster. I was curious to find out which Australian animals, what literary baggage, if any, they're bringing to that. So anthropomorphism is something that interests me, and just looking at trying to tell stories through different viewpoints. So as part of the PhD research, part of my task was to write 2 novels, and one was called The Shark Caller, one was called The Dog with 7 Names, exploring degrees of anthropomorphism. So, for example, The Dog with 7 Names is told completely from it's exploring World War II from a dog's point of view, which is a safe vehicle for young readers. And then The Shark Caller is really quite weird, set up in Papua New Guinea, a very different, mostly human perspective. However, there are 12 chunks that are from a mako shark's point of view. So that was really challenging, and a giant octopus, which sounds really weird when I try to explain it, but it seems to work. So it's a fun thing to play around with. And for children, if there are any children listening, rewriting the first part of a story from a different perspective is a really fun thing to do.
Erica, how do you approach illustrating for children's literature?
My art adventures, I've explored different techniques. So I'm a painter, I work in acrylic and oil, I do a lot of drawing, life drawing, and I've also done collages as part of my art. And collage, I use my own materials, generally speaking. So I like to rip up some of those paintings that I might have done that I didn't like, or I liked a little bit of it, and it is enormously satisfying. So instead of having huge drawers full of work that you don't know what to do with, you can actually turn it into something else. And it was a great big light bulb moment for me. And it's, as an activity, I like it a lot. So obviously there's a beautiful, rich tradition of children's book illustrators working in collage. Eric Carle is very famous for it, The Very Hungry Caterpillar and all of his books. There's a lot of current contemporary illustrators working in collage, many, many wonderful work. For me, it is a very playful medium, and for me that is an important part of making images for children, to make it feel playful, to make it feel accessible, make it almost feel that they could make a picture like this. Because I get so much joy out of making it. I think I want to spread the news that ripping things up, reusing previous work that's had a different incarnation beforehand, it kind of carries meaning. So for me, say some of the bits of paper that appear in this book as part of the image, I know that I painted that on a riverbank, I painted it in the Kimberley, I painted it in the forest in Victoria or wherever, or it was a portrait or a still life, and that makes me happy. So there's this kind of layering of meaning. And I guess if you go back to sort of that more serious way of approaching this story. I see history as fragments that are all brought together, and so it felt even more appropriate for this story to use that technique. And of course, I wanted to also have dynamism. I wanted to have movement. And so in some ways I thought, well, it would have been easier if I'd drawn it, like drawn it in charcoal or something like that. But I knew that Dianne had, in her previous absolutely beautiful horse books, she'd had a wonderful illustrator doing beautiful black and white artwork. And so my first book, Hope is the Thing, also used this technique, and that's why Lauren Smith from the National Library asked me to illustrate it in that style, and I was very happy to do that. But it was challenging because you have to find a way, a visual language that gives the child enough information so that they know what they're looking at, but it's not realism. I'm not trying to precisely depict these creatures. I'm trying to evoke them, and I'm trying to evoke a feeling and an atmosphere. And for me, that fragmentation and this playful approach, which means I do a lot of drawing beforehand, then I do a lot of moving the pieces around, trying different things before I glue it down. And the gluing down process is actually quite stressful, because then if you just glue it and the nose of the horse is just slightly at the wrong angle, it's very annoying. And anyway, you can probably see as you look closely at the images, it's got a rough and ready feel, which I also felt was appropriate for the story, because the horses, the nature is like that. The nature makes use of all its droppings, its barks, its twigs, and everything.
And I love the way you've explained that, in that I think if you've done a lot of research, particularly if it's an historical fiction, which this is in a way, it's overlapping, then I think I read once that yes, there are lines of print, but the space between the lines is where it's infusing the writing. So all the work that we do behind the scenes, like the iceberg analogy, so you've got the glittery part that you see is the final book, but you've got all the work below. But I really love the way you've explained that with the emotions and the feelings that come through, that I think if you've done all your work, and as a writer, I can't even begin to guess how many drafts I did for this book, like dozens, hundreds perhaps, to get that finally. I know even just the last stanza, there was so days of work to get that. But I think that you're bringing yourself, you're bringing your knowledge, you're bringing your work, your feelings and emotions into that, which I guess infuses it somehow, doesn't it? And I'm also thinking all my old manuscripts, I should just rip them all up and make, and make horses and things.
Oh, it is. That's what I've been doing. And
that's going to be fun.
It is fun. And I think it's something, it's just refreshing, and it makes you look at things differently. And just with the drafting process, I did a million versions of a lot of the spreads, and it took me ages to get the stallion right. With this one image, like it was a drawing from this photo that I'd taken of this brumbie, and it was the stance of the brumbie.
For me, the Snowy Mountains is one of the most beautiful places in Australia. Such a unique landscape. The stars at night are something special too. Erica, where does that remarkable place fit into your life?
Oh, I've had some beautiful experiences up in the Snowies and in the high country generally, in Victoria, riding horses, camping, bushwalking, and also four-wheel driving. And that has taken me to extraordinarily beautiful places. In doing that, I've had some encounters with animals and bird life, which have been really special. And so in this book, there was a particular photograph that I had of a brumbie that was just visible through the trees. We just stopped to have a break, and there it was. And I actually sat and drew it, and I did a little painting, and I've used some elements of that painting in the book as well. But it was the stance of the brumbie. It was this sort of alertness. It was the kind of the quivering, like the watching, really, really looking, and the strength of it. And there's something just so majestic about the horse. And obviously the horse as a creature has so much meaning. So in a way, it gets to that awkward spot the horses in the high country, but they are in the high country and they've survived there. So there's something admirable about that as well. Like it's such a rubbing up of feelings and issues and complexity. And that's, I guess, what I get when I'm in those beautiful places. And I want to protect it. I want to make sure it's preserved and can exist as a place that all of us feel awe, we feel connected to something bigger than ourselves, we get connected to all the creatures and people and everyone who's been there over the many years, all those layers.
Which come out in the artwork. It's amazing.
And for you, Dianne, the high country, what does it mean to you?
Well, I'm fortunate that my sister lives in a remote off-grid way up near Biabo wilderness, and so when I go to visit, we're the only ones for a very long way, and there's beautiful birds coming in. We hear lyrebirds, see wombats if we're lucky, and so the wildlife, we're seeing that. And also they then are on a ridge looking out across a valley across to Kosciuszko, and the sunsets are just spectacular. And so the privilege of being out in that area and seeing the Snowy River, it is a privilege. Not all Australians have had that. So for me, it's also I guess my forebears are from the high country as well. So we do have to realise that the land we're on, has been taken. But I think we can also then feel a sense of country in a different way. I think you can still love country and feel a deep sense and perhaps have a glimpse of what it must be for Aboriginal people who were the amazing horsemen of the area. I think the man from Snowy River, I'm sure, was inspired partly by those incredible stockmen.
In the final pages of this book, there's some interesting information on who might have been the real man from Snowy River. An Irish immigrant, Jack Riley, he comes up, but there are other contenders. 2 Indigenous stockmen, a Wiradjuri man called Dick, and Ngarigo and Jurunganj man, Toby is his name. It's always interesting to explore the background to a legend.
Yes, and I don't think we'll ever really know, but as a writer, I know that you take ideas from all over the place and then you use different ideas to build your own characters. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's what Banjo did. Of course, Jack Riley would have been a huge influence because Banjo hiked with him and he did have these amazing experiences up. And the Corryong Museum, you can find out a lot more about him. But I do think those other people, there have been amazing rides that have inspired communities and writers. And at the time, the most wonderful stockmen were the Aboriginal stockmen who were renowned riders in the high country. But as it says in the end pages of the book, Banjo couldn't have used one of those solely as his man at the time. But that doesn't mean he can't be inspired by their courage and their gracefulness as riders. So I do think that there were many people who inspired the story. There was the young fellow from Adaminaby who he was just a stripling himself who chased a valuable runaway stallion. And the interesting thing about the Biadbo area, there aren't many places. I think there's only this one area, which is not far from where my sister lives, where there is this pine-clad ridges, and there's an area there with a steep drop, which is known locally by both Indigenous families and also people from the settler families' descendants, which is called where Dick took fright. And there is a story about someone putting on the brakes, really. Imagine you come to this huge drop where Dick took fright. So for me, I think the man is an amalgam of many inspirational people.
Erica, has that special ridge, pine-clad ridge, found its way into your illustration?
I did study. I made a whole lot of notes about the exact trees and all of that, but that's the thing with the poetic license with my artwork and me not trying to be too scientifically correct in how I'm depicting things. It's to allow imagination to infuse that.
Dianne Wolfer and Erica Wagner, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you about the Colt from Old Re, and thank you for joining me on the Good Reading podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, Greg. It's been really wonderful to speak with you.
Fabulous. Thank you.
I've been talking to author Dianne Wolfer and illustrator Erica Wagner about their new book for young readers, The Colt from Old Regret. It's published by the National Library of Australia, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to Good Reading print and online magazine at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.